Good afternoon. Everyone. My name is Lindokuhle Nzuza, and thank you so much for joining this webinar. Head up the Jamlab project here at the Wits Center for Journalism. Before we start with the program of the day, I'd like to give you a brief overview on what we do and how we do it. So the main goal at Jamlab is to strengthen innovation in African independent journalism and media, as well as grow the diversity of the continent's voices in the public space. So at Jamlab, we believe that good ideas need to be known so that we can learn from them. And in the same breath, we believe that failed ideas need to be known for the same reason. So we do this. This is how we do it. We run 3 programs under the Jamlab umbrella that mutually reinforce one another, which is namely the Accelerator Program, the Knowledge Program, and the Community of Practice. So in the Accelerator Program, this is where we provide coaching, mentoring, technical support through a 6-month program for entrepreneurs in Africa, So through the program, we have supported 29 teams across the continent. 16 of these startups are women-led, and 6 of the teams have received external funding. So under the community of practice, this is where we provide an opportunity to share shared experiences, knowledge, and learning. And in the knowledge program, which is through our magazine, we showcase innovations and innovators using new technologies, tools, and provide access to research. So I'm really excited about today's webinar because we're going to be discussing the business of good news. We consume news everywhere, on television, radio, online, and on social media. We consume different types of news about widespread corruption, diseases, war, and natural disasters happening around us. What about positive news which are happening in our communities? Because positive news builds communities, it increases tourism about a region, and encourages citizens to participate in their respective communities. So today, I am joined by entrepreneur from Sierra Leone, Vickie Remoe, also a director and TV show host for the Vickie Remoe Show. Vickie describes her show as a cross between the Oprah Winfrey Show and Anthony Bourdain's Parts Unknown. Welcome to our virtual stage, Vickie.
Thank you. So excited to be here, even though it's 6 a.m. where I'm at. Super excited. I had 2 cups of coffee already, so I'm ready to go. I'm wired.
Thank you for joining us. And then we have South African broadcaster, journalist turned media entrepreneur, Shahan Ramkissoon. Shahan is the co-founder for FeelSA, which is an online multimedia news platform that specializes in good news. So the organization aims to highlight all things admirable about the nation through storytelling that inspires and elevates its citizens to the rest of the world. Thank you for joining us, Han.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so glad that I can contribute to this discussion today. It's going to be fun.
It is. Thank you, Shahan. Let's start with you, Vickie. Please, can you take us through the idea behind the Vickie Remoe Show?
Okay, so I'm a child of the diaspora, meaning that I spent a huge part of my childhood away from Sierra Leone. So when I was 12 years old, the civil conflict that was on the borders between Sierra Leone and Liberia eventually moved into Freetown, which is the capital city, and like thousands of Sierra Leoneans, we had to fled our home. Moved to Ethiopia, and from there ended up in the US. And I did high school in the US and undergrad. And during that time, I consumed whatever minimal, it wasn't a lot of coverage in Sierra Leone, but whenever we were on TV, as you would know, it was negative, right? Whenever we were on TV, it was stories related to the war. And even after the war ended, the narrative around Sierra Leone was still about the war. And so on the one hand, you know, those stories were true, they were real, but I also had to juxtapose that with the childhood that I'd had in Sierra Leone before the war, right? It almost seemed that Sierra Leone's story on the external side only started and began at the war. So stories were told as if there was nothing before the war. And so I grew up having to constantly explain where I was with two people who all they knew was the war, right? So when you say Sierra Leone, the thing that they closely associated, the only points of reference they had were amputations, blood diamond, death, disease, and destruction. And so when I finally relocated to Sierra Leone, you know, even watching local television, the narrative was almost exactly the same from within, right? The stories that were told, then there was only one national broadcaster. This was in the year 2007. And there wasn't really a lot about us as a people, culture, arts, travel, like what does it mean to be a Sierra Leonean in the post-war era? And so I decided that I was going to do a talk show about contemporary Sierra Leonean life. And you know, that it's been over a decade now. And you would think that the mission would be accomplished, but it's not. I'm still, what I've had to do is expand the platform from broadcast to digital. And then the pandemic hit, so we had to move from TV show to podcast, and just constantly finding ways to rearrange the mission to quote unquote make Sierra Leone famous for positive things, to meet the audience wherever they are. So if it's TV, we're there. If it's radio, find a way to talk to people on radio. And if it's digital, find a way to then bring the stories to digital platform.
That's beautiful, Vickie. Shahan, congratulations on the launch of FeelSA. Please take us through behind the idea of FeelSA, how it came about.
So if anybody knows my background as a journalist and news anchor, I mean, you'd know that my job just before I left ENCA was to argue with politicians who, you know, we believed were corrupt and looting our state. And I spent 17 years as a journalist, mostly highlighting negatives of our country. And I would travel around the world and I would still hear the negatives. You know, the perception about South Africa was not a one when you speak to the man on the street in the US or the UK. And I reached a point in my career when I decided that I wanted change. I felt a bit stifled. There's only so many times you can argue with a politician about corruption. there's a huge responsibility for accountability journalism in our country, which is absolutely necessary to protect our democracy. But there's also a huge gap when it comes to telling positive stories. So when I left, I joined Eclipse Communications as a chief strategy officer, and the chairman of the company had a really great idea. He said to us, why don't we create a good news platform? Because, you know, we work with clients who actually do so many good things in communities. And I sat there and I said, that just sounds like PR. But in years only telling good news stories. So we came together, we've co-founded FeelSA Africa with the chairman of Eclipse Communications, Jackie and Steve. They both own that company. And we went out on a mission to only tell positive news stories. So it's not PR related. It's about human beings in our country who are doing good in their communities. And we tell our reporters, start in your community, find out what your neighbor's doing to help the other neighbor, and tell us that story. Find out how a community is building a small farm to create jobs. Find out how one man in Khayelitsha started a youth choir to actually get kids off the streets and away from gangs to put them on this new path. And that's what we did. And because Tanya and I are video journalists, we are TV journalists, we decided that, you know, we know the power of TV journalism, the impact of visuals and how people relate to it if they hear somebody else's story for themselves and see it. So we decided to take that same professional TV storytelling and put it online for the world to see. It's free. You don't have to subscribe to our website because we want people sitting in London and the US to see the good side of our country. So that's how FeelSA was formed.
That's a very nice story, Shahan. So how has the transition been for you from covering hard current news and to telling positive news? It's quite a shift.
I'm a happier person. Think about it, right? When I was telling the hard news, it was mostly negative news. It was mostly stressful. And I'm a journalist, but I'm also a human being. Yes. And your spirit at some point does feel, you know, quashed when you're telling all of these negative things Monday to Friday, sometimes Monday to Sunday. Yes. And the shift for me wasn't difficult because I was always about storytelling. And this is a slightly long story, but I want to tell it to you. I was 14 years old in high school, and there was a student in my class who was really poor, who couldn't afford to pay her school fees. So the school did not let her get her report card. The school did not let her go on school trips. So while we celebrated as a class with our cards, our report cards, and going out on school trips, I remember seeing her sad sitting in the corner. No smile, just sitting there because her parents couldn't afford to pay her school fees. And I said to my mom, there is something wrong here. Aren't we a democracy now? I was 14, right? I was still learning these things. My mom said, yes, it's not allowed. Remember, Nelson Mandela promised free education for those who can't afford it. So I asked her if we could help, and we weren't in the financial position to help. So the Daily News in Durban, it's a provincial newspaper in KwaZulu-Natal, they had a page every Thursday called the Young Daily News, and they asked youngsters to write. So I saw this as my opportunity. Let me go in there and write about this girl who is being subjected to this by the school, who is following apartheid style, you know, rules as far as I was concerned. Wrote about it. The education department came in and told the school principal and, you know, the governing body that what they were doing was wrong, and things changed. And I realized the power of journalism. So when you talk about a shift, I started out reporting on something negative that turned into positive. And that's what I'm trying to do here. So it's not a big shift for me. I love telling positive stories because now I get to highlight the good that people are doing in the country. I don't miss the bad stuff, but I do believe it still is very necessary in journalism.
Oh, okay. Thank you for that story, Shahan. Just a side note, do you still speak to that student, your classmate?
No, I lost touch because after I started writing, the school targeted me and I actually homeschooled. I left high school and I homeschooled. So I was homeschooled from the age of 15.
Oh, sorry about that. Sorry about that.
Oh, it was the best thing to happen to me.
Oh,
Best thing. This path I'm on is because I made those decisions. So nothing to be sorry about.
okay. Vickie, please can you tell us about some of the stories that you've covered so far?
Oh God, I mean, it's so for me, as you can imagine, it's been a long journey. And so I've told so many stories. But most recently, I was doing a series traveling to every district in Sierra Leone. This is before COVID put a stop to that. And trying to basically create a narrative about each region, right? So that when local people will think of this particular region, they would know, oh, that place is famous for this, right? And that in a way you get to build like stories that kind of weave in and weave together like a national picture, but you break it down by regions. I think one of my favorites from that series was one I did about women who were making things with their hands. So like artisans, right? And we artisans and entrepreneurs, and 3 women. So in one region, we went to the south of Sierra Leone, the second city, it's called Bo. And we were looking for stories to tell. And I remember, because I'd been there before, seeing a woman who wove traditional cloth on the side of the road. And I was like, why don't we just do this lady? Like, come on. It's like, she's right here. And so we literally just kind of like pulled over to the side with the crew and we went to speak to her. And she was from another part on the eastern region and she had come there. And so I was talking to her, like, how did you end up, making country cloth? Here in Sierra Leone, we call it country clothes. And she was that, well, she was given off to marriage when she was about 13. She had given birth to 3 kids. And at some point, the husband tells her she's not young anymore, so he's no longer interested, leaves her to care for 3 children. But then at some point, somebody comes with, I think it was the, those like community training program, skills development program, and they start training people on how to weave. And before that, she was doing like tabletop selling like pepe and like little like, things from the forest that she would forage. And so she learned how to weave. And she was like, I wasn't really good at it to start, but then she moved to a different, moved to this different town. And she started practicing how to weave and, set up shop on the side of the road. And she had a son who was actually autistic who works with her. And then she just, she said, I started practicing and people who used to look down on me now, like, started to respect me. And now, I have a daughter who's about to graduate university, and she herself couldn't read and write. And she said, I don't know, there was the way she felt, the way she told her story from this place of I have overcome. And when you see someone like that on the side of the road, because of where she's working, in your mind, you don't realize that this is somebody who just sits doing this work even on the side of the road is growth for someone. Like, this is a woman who is now financially independent, and she can care for her family. And in another place, it was just like a consistent theme of women who had learned to do something that had no kind of like felt displaced and didn't have much, but had learned to do something, whether it was processing cassava to gari. And all of them, the story was almost consistently the same. I didn't go to school. I was given up for marriage. My education was interrupted, but now my kids are in university or they've graduated. And that feeling of accomplishment, it's a kind of story that, like, when I think, when you think of the, African women, right? That picture of African women, that we have always in labor. I always think about, I'm like, the representation you get of African women when you think of them, it's like either they're carrying their head, picking up a load, by the waterside, collecting water, carrying their children, like this constant portrayal of us in labor. And I think sometimes when you see those, even in art or any kind of like photos, et cetera, what gets lost in translation and in those captures is this part of like that little thing, that seemingly little thing that this person is doing is actually economic empowerment, is actually financial independence. And for me, those are the stories that I don't necessarily think that they're the stories that I'm most famous for, but the ones that kind of improve my well-being and help me feel better as a human being. Those are the stories. And then of course, there are the shinier things, like once I went to Ghana and I interviewed everybody in like the TV station, Jackie Appiah, John Dumelo, like people who are like glitz and glamour. I've also traveled by road from Dakar to Bamako. And it was very interesting because I got arrested on the highway. Some police officers pulled me over in a town called Tambacounda in Senegal, where they said that I must be a CIA spy because my passport was Sierra Leonean, but my accent was American. And they knew that I had been sent here to like make them look bad, basically. So they pulled me off this bus that had about 70 people, all like, French would say like coincé, like all like squeezed in together. And they debussed me. And the bus left me in the middle of nowhere. And the side of that is that my mom at the time was a diplomat in Ghana, and she had warned me. She had said, you know, before you go to Senegal, you know, let me send something to the Sierra Leonean High Commission. So I'm like, oh, mommy, please, I don't need it. What is this? After all, I speak French. I lived in Paris for a year. Like, what is the worst? Mommy, please, it's Africa. Don't worry. And I remember then having to make a call to my mom in the middle of nowhere and to tell her, like, I've been arrested and I don't know what's going to happen. And so, I call her, and the first thing, as soon as I hear of her voice, I'm like, they've arrested me. And I just like, I break down. And as soon as I start crying, the police officer goes, but why are you crying? Why are you crying? I'm like, you just took me off my bus. And he goes, but why are you crying? I just want to marry you. I only, you're from Sierra Leone. You're so beautiful. I want to marry you. So please, it's not anything bad. I'm just looking for a wife because I know that with a wife like you, I wouldn't have to pay any bride price because you already have money. If I marry a Senegalese woman, I would have to care for her. But you're fine. I can just marry. You can sit here with me. And then I cried some more because I felt completely defeated. And eventually I'm like, but okay, you do realize I've now missed my bus. How are you going to get me? And so we hop on his motorcycle. I'm in the back, like this is like my backpack holding. Okay, the other thing is, imagine like I'm wearing torn jeans, a t-shirt, my head is like shaved Grace Jones style. My hair is red. It's in a predominantly Muslim country. I don't know what I was thinking, but like I looked like a crazy person. So he puts me on the back of his motorcycle and we're riding and he's like, oh, don't worry. The bus is slow. We're going to be there in like 2 minutes. Of course, we never catch up with the bus. And then he asks me if I would just give him a little kiss. And I'm like, no, sir. In fact, I'm already married. As a fellow Muslim, I can't do this to my husband. I wasn't married. And he was like, but your husband isn't here. And I'm like, but you know who is? God is here. And as soon as I said I wouldn't kiss him, he was like, well, he can't use any more of his fuel to take me to find the bus. So he pulls over to the side of the road. I have to hitchhike on like an 18-wheeler truck with 3 men who are like taking goods from Senegal to Mali. And they don't speak any French. They only speak Bambara, which I don't speak. I hop on top and we ride for hours and hours. Eventually we get to the border. I come up with this 18-wheeler because there's a long line at the border to cross. And I'm just like, I don't know what I'm going to do. Like, I'm just like completely lost just walking. It's like dirt and dry and desert. And eventually I see the back of the bus. I wasn't traveling alone, by the way. So my man at the time had completely abandoned me when this happened. So, and then I show up and he's like, oh, Vickie. And I'm like, please don't talk to me. But eventually we did get to Mali. We crossed the border, got on the train, and it ended up being like a phenomenal experience, like just getting to Bamako and getting to see their culture and, capture some of their stories about like, people making artisanal goods, because Mali is also really, really good for that. And even meeting a lot of Sierra Leoneans along the way in Mali who had been displaced because of the war in Sierra Leone and had now been in Mali for like a decade doing like really amazing things. And then bringing those stories back to broadcast on television in Sierra Leone and having people like just feel so interconnected, right, with the rest of the continent. And so those are the ones that definitely stick out to me. There are more, but those kinds of experiences experiences where I'm on the road away off the beaten path, often not knowing if we're going to get a story. But this is the thing about, I feel like, about the African continent, is that like life is happening around you all the time. And if you just stop for a second and just ask people, and our people are so generous of themselves with their stories, that you're always going to have gems.
Thank you, Vickie. And I absolutely love your first story about that woman, because it actually shows it actually highlights how people are when they feel seen. Like, even if they do like the most smallest, like, but people might see as like the most smallest job ever. But it's very important when people feel seen and feel important in their community.
Yeah.
Shahan, please can you tell us some of the most stories that you've covered so far which stand out to you?
So there's a couple, but I'll tell you about two very quickly. The one I mentioned briefly about a guy. I had a friend in Cape Town who came across this choir singing outside Parliament, and he told me about it. And I said, oh, that sounds cool. Let me make contact with them. There's always a story to these things, though. We just think these are random people singing, but eventually we tracked the guy down, and it turns out he went back to his community in Khayelitsha to start this youth choir to get kids off the streets and away from gangs. And I tracked them down into this small church that was falling apart, but they were practicing. And they sounded beautiful. When you listen to people live and you get goosebumps, that's the feeling our crew had when we got there. And these are youngsters from 11 to 18, 20. And I tell you about this group, it's so diverse. It wasn't just girls and boys. It was non-binary people from the community, so accepting. There was no judgment whatsoever. And I asked him why he did it. And he said to me, it was because he grew up in that community and he saw the cycle playing itself over and over and over again. Crime, gangs, no life because you're trapped in this cycle. And he decided that when he left his community, he wanted to come back to start the Khayelitsha Youth Choir to actually get these kids off the streets. And I spoke to a 14-year-old boy. His name was Kazimla. And he said to me, people think about Khayelitsha as this crime zone, but for me, this choir is hope. I want to change the narrative about my community, and I want to be one of the people who changes the cycle. This is a 14-year-old. When I was 14, I was playing TV games. I was not thinking about changing the story and narrative about my community. And this guy eventually was just looking to get the choir a record label that will record them so that they can make some money and invest in the kids that are in the group. And eventually, after our story aired, they got that. So when we talk about telling stories to bring about change, that's our aim. We were able to get the Khayelitsha Youth Choir a recording, which they never were going to get without our story showcasing their talent. And we're now changing every single person's life in that group because they see their future outside of Khayelitsha, and that's what we did. The other story is a 29-year-old who was shot in Nyanga 9 times. This is a woman who was in her hometown. She was crossing the road. She was shot at 9 times. And she says every time she tried waking up, she got a bullet. She then had to pay a cab, bleeding with 9 bullets in her, paid a cab, 200 Rand to take her to the hospital. The cab driver said 200 wasn't enough. So she had to take her shoes off and give it to him. And he took her to the hospital. She had passed out by then. He threw her on the side of the street next to the hospital. She crawled through the gate to make sure that she was in front of the camera so that they would see her and come and rescue her. Her name is Lona Mlonzi. She somehow survived this through many operations. And guess what she's done? She has managed to go and start an internet connectivity company that takes the internet to underserviced areas like poor communities, back to Nyanga, most communities on the Cape Flats. And I asked her why. Like, why do you do this when you were shot 9 times in this community? And she said, because I'm hoping that these people will somehow find jobs by being connected online instead of joining gangs and shooting down people like me.
Mm.
So those are the incredible stories we have in this country. And those are the stories that we are telling because it's so necessary. And that balance, why don't we have the balance of good and bad news? Yes, there's lots of bad news, and it's necessary because we have to hold our government to account. But we need to also share the good things that people and companies are doing in South Africa.
Thank you, Shahan. And I think your stories also show the impact and the importance of telling the stories to the nation, to Africa, so that people know more about them. Very important. And another thing, it would not be easy for us to tell these stories without funding. So I'd like to talk about funding. How has it been approaching potential investors? How were they? Were they excited? Were they skeptical? And yeah, how was it? Can we start with you, Vickie?
Sure. So first of all, I should say, when I got into TV, I don't think I really thought of it as a money-making venture. I truly just jumped into it heart first, trying to tell these stories. And then it was like, all right, storytelling costs money. Hiring crews costs money. And, one of the things I like to tell people is that, South Africa, for example, is like a very developed media market, right? You're probably not the first at anything anymore when it comes to the media. In Sierra Leone in 2006, like I said, there was only one TV station, the national broadcaster. I was the first person to independently produce a television program in the post-war period. And so when I would go to sponsors and try to talk to them about advertising on my show, they were like, wait, we don't even have electricity. Who's watching television? And for the most part, it was true. Access to electricity is still a big challenge for Sierra Leone. So even just people watching my show people having access to the show was a problem. So how do you make a case for it? To businesses, right? So that was one challenge. And then on the other hand, like one of the things that I faced in Sierra Leone was sexual harassment. So I would go out to pitch my TV show and almost repeat, like consistently. I don't remember, maybe there was like one time where I went to an organization to pitch my story where it didn't end up into somebody basically propositioning me and saying that, oh, like, yeah, this is a really great idea, but you should be my girlfriend. And then I will really support it. And so in those early years, there really wasn't a financial model, to be really honest with you. I thought it would be, yes, people advertising, but that was like really difficult to come by. So like most startups, it was financed by, family and friends, like, my mom supporting me. And then eventually after the second and third year, I was able to get advertising dollars from like the local Coca-Cola company, at some point also a local mobile company, but also it was never consistent. People weren't signing up for like long term. So like at the end of every season, we would have to start looking for financing again, which is why after the first 4 years, I took a break from producing the television show because it just wasn't viable. And so then I went to journalism school. And I took a 7-year break from making the Vickie Remoe Show, and I only returned to it back in 2018. And when I returned to it in 2018, by then I'd already kind of owned some equipment. And so then I partnered with a TV station and was able to bring it back. And then I chose like a crowdsourcing model, right, for funding. So I started a campaign called #MakeSierra_Leone_Famous and asked the community to help me bring the show to the level that it needs to be. And I was able to raise maybe like $15,000 in a month. And we used that to invest in equipment. But also during that time, I'd also formed my own marketing agency. And so what we were able to do is use the resources and assets we got from, the profits of doing marketing for businesses to then also then finance the Vickie Remoe Show. And then also once you do it, we were able to then get sponsorship from, I believe it was Orange most recently. And so what I've learned about financing in a place like Sierra Leone, in a market that's undeveloped, you really have to like bootstrap and have a proof of concept and bootstrap it on your own for a really long time, almost like self-incubating, before people will kind of like have faith that this thing is viable and then they'll invest in it. So now, yeah, it's much easier for me to go to sponsors and to say, whenever I want to do the show and to say, hey, sponsor my show, they have no problem or no question about its value, reach or audience, et cetera, et cetera. But in those early years, yeah, it was really, really difficult. Now I don't really worry about funding as much because we're almost like a really established brand. So that's what I would say about funding. I think like our market is just not as dynamic as other places. In order to be able to have a strong and viable, business, you need, media company or production company, you need a strong and viable private sector, right? You need people who are producing products and brands who then have a need to use your show and your product as a medium for reaching their target audiences. But Sierra Leone is still, a low developing country. And even though we have some companies, we just don't have enough yet still to be able to bankroll a finance production. Now I'm actually, shockingly, I'm now like the kind of person who can commission content. And so what I've kind of become the private sector. I like to make a joke like we're the investors we've been waiting for, where I've transitioned from less than like looking for financing for myself to now being in a position to be able to like finance other people creating content, specifically moving to digital.
Thank you so much, Vickie. And I think with your example, it just shows how important it is to have a community that believes in you and believes in your idea. We have a couple of questions from the audience. We're going to take it shortly, but after Shahan speaks.
So it's, we're talking about a strong private sector, and we have that in South Africa. But the reality is that they all talk and know. There's a term that I learned when I started this business with Tanya, and it was return on investment. and I said to these companies, how do you expect me to tell me your return on investment when we haven't launched yet? I don't have an audience reach. I can't tell you how many impressions I'm going to get on a post or any of that. So what I need is for you to believe in the good that's happening in our country. And there were so many people who said to us, oh my gosh, that's a great concept. We definitely will look into something like this. We want to be aligned to the positive stories in South Africa. And then guess what? They all went into hiding. We couldn't find them. So it was me. I think we had like at least 20 to 30 meetings with potential investors and nobody came through.
Wow.
So it was very defeating at some point. You feel like this is not going to work out, but we were so lucky to have Steve and Jackie, the co-founders of Eclipse, the Eclipse group, who said to us, we will start you up. We'll give you the money you need to start up. And like you, Vickie, have experienced, people want to see the content before they actually invest. So they gave us the cash boost that we needed, and we started telling the stories. And then luckily, ETV saw a gap and how necessary it was to tell the good stories in South Africa. And they bought our content for a year.
Yay, that's awesome.
But that's where we are right now. And we are running very efficiently with this contract, and it's helpful. But the reality is our website doesn't have advertising, because those companies that say they're all about the good news in South Africa, they still want the ROI. And my thing is, I can't give you that. You need to believe in what we're doing, and you need to believe in the stories we're telling. So it's still very difficult. Outside of ETV, which is our main income right now, we're still trying to get the brand bigger and to get people to believe in our vision and invest in the good storytelling. Because all of those brands keep saying, oh, the media only focuses on the negative. Then why are you advertising there? You know, you keep saying that, but I'm asking you why you're not advertising on my platform, which is only good. It just doesn't make sense. But again, boils down to words and actions, but we're here and we're telling the stories we need to.
Thank you, Shahan. So I'm going to bring in some of our audience members who have questions. Firstly, we have Gladwell Ntusi Kaya. Gladwell? Gladwell? Okay. Let me take a question from Boniwe Dudu. So she says, thank you, colleagues, for sharing the inspiring work that you're doing. How do you sustain your media organizations and support, protect your crew and staff? How do you generate an income? And please kindly explain your business models and if you find reporting on good news is sustaining in terms of generating an income.
So honestly, when I started out, it was wanting to report on good news, but it really truly was more so representation. I think that representation and by representation, I mean that looking around at who's in the audience, who's in your community, who's in your country, and asking, are people seeing these people? Are these people being seen? And by seen, do they have a platform? Are they being held by the community? Are they being uplifted? And how then can you, if you uplift those people and you make them seen, what's the value? What's the intrinsic value of that? And if you can find a way to communicate that value to local businesses and local businesses, you win. And also, I think a key thing to understand, at least that I've been able to understand, is to look for where sometimes we want to like do things our way, but within the markets that we're working in, the market just isn't ready, right? So for example, once COVID hit in Sierra Leone, I had to pivot because I could no longer travel with the show and so I used some of the stories we were producing and turn them into podcasts. And then after the first season of doing podcasts, I'm like, wait, yeah, people in the diaspora are listening to the podcast, but people locally aren't listening to the podcast. So then for the next season, I made sure the podcast was also airing on national radio, on radio, right? And so it's easier than my local audience, my local brands, they want to be on radio, right? They want to be on local platforms. And my diaspora-based brands also want to be on local platforms. And so it's like almost kind of thinking about, where's the audience, right? Where's my audience? Where's the audience that brands want to reach, right? And how can I also be there? And so what's kept me going, I think what's made me relevant, I started the Vickie Remoe Show in 2008. It's 2023. And today, I'm the most probably recognizable TV brand in Sierra Leone, or media personality. And I feel like the reason why that's so is because I've always been able to like pivot to the next thing and I call myself the evergreen queen, right? Making content that's evergreen so that I can repackage it and reproduce it and bring it somewhere else. So, something can be started for broadcast, and then I'll put it on YouTube, and then it'll become a podcast, and then it'll inspire me to write a book, right? A children's book. And there's this like interconnection that I constantly keep doing so one revenue stream, broadcast alone can't do it. Digital alone can't do it. So consistently think about what I'm creating. How can I repackage it for different platforms? And then who is going to be interested in that in the audience in that platform, so then that they'll be able to or interested in financing it. And also having like different, I would say, not necessarily packages, but different products within what I'm doing for different size of companies, right? I can't ask a startup to pay the same amount of money as a multinational, right? But they both want the same kind of visibility. Like, what can you do within what you're doing to create products for the businesses that may not have the biggest amount of budget, but are interested in partnering with you? I think the biggest mistake probably we all make is that we all tend to go to the same 10 or 12 big companies and expect them to fund us because they're like, oh, this is a big company, they have a lot of money. But that means you're also in a lot of competition with other people who are looking for financing from them. So I try to always come kind of like the people who are in the middle here. There's a lot more of them. And so then create like, I may be offering like smaller packages that are not as financially lucrative for me. It means that I have a bigger pool of potential advertisers.
Thank you. And Shahan?
Well, Vickie explained it. There's no, I mean, in terms of doing, and I want to use the term business in this industry, ultimately, we need money to fund the storytelling. It's about adaptability, and there's no blanket approach. So if somebody asked me for a rate card, I'm not going to give them a generic rate card. We adapt according to the business, how big they are, how small they are, and then basically make things work. And we've also adapted our storytelling because we've evolved from telling a regular TV news story to now doing a first-person way of telling a story. So the person will tell their own story. We've gone into using quirky, memes to tell our stories when necessary so that we get people smiling. And we are basically in line with the trends so that we're always relevant.
Yeah.
And always something that looks edgy on TV versus regular. Right. And that's how we sustain. If you ask the question about how do you sustain yourself in terms of finances, you have to keep your audience interested in order to get your funders, to give you the money, because you stay relevant that way. Yeah. So it really boils down to a very simple formula of being agile and making sure that you are right there with the trends and you make your product nothing normal. It has to be extraordinary. That's what we're trying to do. It has to be extraordinary content, which is not easy, but it is possible.
Yes. Thank you for that, Shahan. We have another question from Alana Shikongo, and it says, thank you both for these valuable insights. The question is, how do you suggest a younger journalists, media professionals find their space or niche in a country or market that is quite saturated like South Africa?
I think the one thing for any journalist that's emerging is to find your beat, right? I want to say like there's no one that's an expert, that's a journalist that's an expert on every single issue. I think the quickest way to establish yourself as a journalist is to find a beat and stick to it and say, you know what, for the next year, I'm going to produce stories about this issue, this place, this community, this trend, so that very quickly in a year, because you would have done like 50, maybe 60 stories, 10 stories, 12 stories, you easily become the sports journalist, right, on this region. Even if it's something as simple as, like, think of it, like, let's say, I don't know, like, let's say, like somebody like Kenya is like, I'm going to be the journalist that reports on everything that Sauti Sol is doing. I'm going to become the expert on Sauti Sol, right? And you might think of that as like, wait, it's just one artist. Like, why would you be a journalist and educate yourself? But you will realize that in 6 months to a year, you'll become the leading voice on Sauti Sol. People will seek you for quotes. People will seek you for like expertise. And from that, you can branch out. And you can do that the same with fashion, hair, beauty, health, women's rights, human rights, LGBTQI issues, like whatever it is. My thing is, if you're new and you're starting out, find one corner and take your flag and put it there and saying, you know what, I'm going to do multimedia journalism on this issue so that I can look back and say that I have a body of work on one thing. You can branch out from anywhere, but that's what makes you relevant. And right now, I think like key things that that definitely, it's like tech in Africa. You can get into tech, you can come into business reporting, always like a need for business reporters. Climate change and the environment are also very hot right now. And of course, music and Afrobeats are also very hot. So if you're emerging today, you have to think about like, what do people want to hear about right now? Okay, I'm going to pitch my fork here, and this is the kind of journalism I'm going to do.
Shahan, would you like to add?
Well, it was specific to South Africa, and Vickie's right. I mean, journalism is about identifying yourself as a journalist that is known for something in particular, and you're not, kind of like everybody else. But in the South African environment in particular, we see that newsrooms are shrinking, right? We all know that. There's retrenchments, it's hard to even get an internship in a newsroom, etc. So if you want to be one of those journalists who wants to get into a newsroom, Vickie's already told you how you can become your own journalist, because there are social media platforms where you can be your own journalist. If you want to get into a newsroom, this is what I did. I just the boundaries. I looked at the boundaries and I found ways to kind of get past it. And how did I do that? By being opinionated, by speaking like a normal South African does instead of a polished news anchor who says, "Sir, I don't agree with you." My response to a politician is, "You're talking absolute rubbish," because that's what South Africans were thinking. So for me, I would advise you to be your own person, be real, and listen to South Africans, because the more they resonate with you, the more they'll listen to what you have to say. So if you're a young journalist, you're going to a scary news environment where there's a huge chance of you being chased out by some nasty, grumpy assignments editor, which happened to me. I would say just keep pushing, because that's what I did. I went back into that newsroom after that guy spoiled me and told me to get out. And I worked. I did stories that nobody else wanted to do until I proved my worth. I know that there are people now who just want to go there and be the #1 reporter, but that's not how this industry works. People want you to climb that ladder, and you're going to have to do it by being different. If you offer stories that are different to what's on that diary, then you're going to be noticed. So it's about being yourself, be an individual, and make sure that you tell stories differently, because there's so many other ways to tell stories now. It's not that stock standard way. And the only way you can get ahead of everyone is to do those stories differently.
Thank you. Alana also asks that production costs money. What advice would you give for a media startup in terms of working with the little that they have? What should people in this situation be prioritizing or thinking about as they start?
I think mobile journalism is actually a gift, to be really honest with you. When people start out with my marketing company now, where I'm teaching people how to produce content, et cetera, everybody wants to break out and touch my cinema cameras and my Canon and this. I'm like, hey, well, where are you going? What do you, no, my friend, please, use your phone. And there's this perception that people have that like, oh no, it won't, that it's the number of pixels that decide the quality of the story. It doesn't. When I started my TV show, it was on SD. You had to like get those little tapes, put it in the camera, walk around, record, and then like transfer it. After you export, you have to render it. It was like a whole cumbersome process, right? In the pre-digital age. And the picture quality itself was not high definition, right? It was just standard definition. And most of the camera phones that you have now, or the phones that you have now, you can really make good quality video. So what's really important is the story itself and not the technology. And I think that the big problem right now is people are getting caught up in, I need this high-end tool for me to be able to do that. This is the easiest it's ever been to create content from anywhere, right? You don't need to be at the center for you to be relevant. I mean, what TikTok has shown us is that like truly anybody anywhere can have a voice, can have a platform. So it's about you finding these stories. The story is key. If you can get the stories, it doesn't matter what kind of tool you're using to produce. It's the is it fascinating? Is it meaningful? Is it fascinating, meaningful, newsworthy local content? If you're creating that, whether it's TV, radio, podcast, digital, you're going to be able to establish yourself.
Thank you so much. Shahan, would you like to add?
Vickie, I agree with you and disagree with you on some levels in South Africa, right? Because the quality of what you produce in South Africa is because we're snobs. We like nice things. And I noticed that with our audience, they still want a crisp video versus a video that's shaky or there's pixelated images, regardless of the story, because they don't even get to listening to the story or watching the story if it's a bad quality video. So
I'm not talking about bad quality as in like shaky, distorted imagery. I'm just talking about kind of this idea that you need like an iPhone 14 or a cinema camera or, some high-end Canon that's several $1,000s. I just mean that if the picture is clear, if the sound is clear and not muffled, not production quality, I just mean like the tools. So if you're starting out, don't go spend thousands and thousands of dollars or worry about spending thousands of dollars to buy high-end equipment, because if you're thinking about it being like a viable, sustainable business, how are you going to recover what's your return on your investment for this? You go buy a powerful camera, but then how long is it going to take you to generate the revenue to even cover the cost of that camera? So I'm always like, start where you are, right? Start where you are with what you've got, and you can build up from there. When I started, to be really honest with you, my video quality was horrendous because I had a crew so I didn't know anything about TV or like video. I would sit there in the studio and we would do a recording, and I will go back and watch a video. And when, let's say you're talking and somebody like leaned forward or leaned back, they did not zoom in or out. If that person leaned forward and they were out of frame, that's how they left it. If it ended up just their hands on camera, that's how they left it. So I would go back and I'm like, so that's unacceptable, right? Like, that's unacceptable.
It is, but I would say, so instead of spending 100,000 on a broadcast camera, you can spend 20 grand on a D4K camera, right? So that's the balance you got to strike there when it comes to production. So same advice then. You start small, but it still has to be of good quality. I don't want to watch anything that has any pixelation right now, whether it's SD or HD. I just don't want to watch it. But that's because I'm a professional when it comes to production. But if anyone had to ask me for advice on how to start a small production business or get your own kit, in 2023, I would advise you to get a 4K HD camera, and they're not that expensive. If you have the money to start a production house, then you have 27,000 to buy one of those cameras. We started with one camera.
We're talking in Rand, right? We're talking in Rand. Okay, because when I hear, I'm like, $27,000. What new journalist is spending 20K on a camera? I want to see them.
No. We could get a good 4K HD broadcast camera for 27K, which is what we invested in. And we told our stories, and it made it to national TV, which is HD, as well. So that's my advice. Invest. It is scary to spend 27,000 the first time around. So invest in it because you are going to get your returns. It's still a much smaller amount in rands compared to spending 100,000 Rand on a big broadcast camera. So my thing is, and I learned this because I didn't have much money when I started this business, and the chairman of the company, who our investors ultimately said, but you have to invest to reap the rewards. And he funded that camera, and he said, it's fine. This is part of the startup costs. And that's my advice to you. Don't be too nervous to spend a little bit of money on something good so that you can reap the rewards. And I learned that with much nerves and anxiety when I went and purchased that camera and brought it back to the office. But now I'm reaping the rewards. So that's my advice for that.
Thank you for that, Shahan. Irene Fon is asking, she says, thank you both for the insight. I'm all for the good news, but often wonder, how can journalists tell good stories from bad events like floods? especially when they affect huge numbers of people in your community. You know, the impact being relevant in even in crisis.
Go ahead, Shahan.
Me, it's very simple. The major broadcasters are going to focus on, the despair that people are going through and experiencing. We as positive storytellers are going to give people who have, gone through all of this traumatic experience, some sort of hope. And how do you give them hope? By telling stories about people who have been affected in those floods, about how they overcame, their homes being washed away. We'll tell stories about how the community came together to feed each other. We'll tell stories about NGOs going to rescue people who have been trapped for days. So there's always a good story to tell. And you might say, but why would you want to tell a good story in such a bad situation? What do we all need as human beings? We need hope. And for people who are in that bad situation, if they see how their neighbors have overcome and defied the odds, it's going to encourage them. It's going to give them hope as well to overcome their difficult experience. And that's how you go about a story like that. Because, when we have disasters and travesties like that happening in the country, it's the indomitable human spirit. Think about those two words, the indomitable human spirit. Well, it's three when you add the, but it really is something that is so wonderful to watch when people come together, overcome what they're going through and help each other out. And that's how we tell the good news stories in that situation.
Thank you, Shahan. Vickie, would you like to add?
So if you're from Sierra Leone, I mean, one thing that we're really, I don't want to say like we've mastered, but I don't want to say it's a country of disaster, but like a lot of bad things happen in Sierra Leone. Like every day, there's just no spin on the reality of what it means to live in Sierra Leone every single day. But I think as an independent producer, right, I always ask myself, if somebody else already has that angle, do I need to tell it? Do I also need to parrot that? How is this story, like what's missing in the narrative, right? What angle hasn't already been covered? So I don't think that like there's a way to turn a bad story that's a story that's negatively impacting your community and your audience into, I don't feel like you need to necessarily make it into like a feel-good story. I think the most important thing is to always think about balance. So always ask yourself, okay, yeah, I know I've told it from this perspective, but is there something else? Is there another way? And I think that sometimes that's when the good news can come in, or the uplifting component. What are people doing in the aftermath, right? Or maybe it's a question about heroes, right? First responders, and those kinds of stories. So, I mean, I never feel this thing of like, oh, because I want to make Sierra Leone famous for positive things, that means that I can't or shouldn't talk about real issues. I think the beauty of being a multimedia journalist, even though like I'm broadcast first, I think the beauty of being a multimedia journalist is that you can tell different kinds of stories on different kinds of platforms, you're not necessarily locked in. So like, yes, on the Vickie Remoe Show, we're not doing breaking news stories, right? Because, first we produce the story, it's like almost like long form documentary. And then later on we broadcast and we distribute it. But every day on social media, I'm not just talking about let's make Sierra Leone famous. Sometimes I'm talking about countering misinformation and disinformation, government propaganda, amplifying citizen voices on issues that matter. And so I just kind of find different ways to engage in public discourse on issues, on breaking news and like current events. But yeah, never trying to say, oh, well, what's the good side? No, it's not, because that's not real, right? Yeah. It's like Chimamanda says about this, the problem with like a single narrative, right? What we want is representation, and real representation is dynamic, right? It's it's 360, meaning that some days it's good news and other times it's not good news. And that's okay too.
Thank you for highlighting that, Vickie. And we can't talk about entrepreneurship without talking about its challenges. It can be challenging and sometimes it's a bit lonely. Shahan, please can you take us through with some of the challenges that you've faced with FeelSA so far and how you overcame them?
Well, the biggest challenge is funding. And without money, you can't start a business or run a business. So that was our first point. I was lucky enough to have investors from the start who were going to do the startup costs. I mean, my difficulty was I was a journalist for 17 years and suddenly I'm a businessman. I didn't even know how to calculate things or come up with decks and all of that. But I learned very quickly because, I'm business minded. I'm actually going to do my MBA next year. So my challenge was funding, and then the second challenge is finding the right people to actually see your vision through. Mm-hmm. Because the reality is there are people with skills and there are people with skills but believe in your vision. So the HR process for me was one of the most difficult things because I was struggling to find people who were good but also had the same vision that Tanya and I have, which is to tell good stories. You also got to find people who are willing to work for a startup. Remember, a startup is not like a big corporate where everything is, set in stone. These are your duties. You come in at 8, you leave at 5. No, you got to come in at 8 and you're leaving at 11 p.m. some nights because we're about to launch this business. Yep. And you're going to be sitting next to me editing the story or building the website or deciding on the color of our brand. It's things like that. So that was one of the hard things for me, but we overcame it because we found the right people. And it's not easy, but we interviewed lots of people to make sure that they had the same energy as we did. And I don't know if you do this, Vickie, but when I interview people, you can have all the experience in the world. You can be sitting there with great reviews from your former employer. But if I don't feel your energy, if you have some vibe and I don't feel it, I'm not hiring you. And I learned this the hard way because I went with someone who had the skills, who was great at what they did. And then the energy was just so negative and it brought us all down. And, I realized, okay, trust your gut. So in business, you got to learn to adapt. You got to learn to be, go with your gut, go with whatever you feel is right or wrong, stay away from the wrong things. And that's how I learned. I mean, it's the learning process for me, to be honest. I left journalism in June last year. So it's not even a year. And I just needed the right people next to me to make this work. And that's how we're making it work.
So I've been an entrepreneur I've always, since I left graduate school, I've only ever been working for myself. And so entrepreneurship is the only way that I know. I think the biggest challenge, definitely finding the right people is key. But I think the biggest challenge starting out for me was getting people to believe that I could do what I said I was going to do, right? Having people trust me. One, because when you're young, and then of course, two, when you're a woman in my market, those are things that they don't want to give you the big money projects in a way. They're like, oh, they'll go and find, either bring in foreign people from the UK, especially. Okay, so my marketing company, for instance, that produces the Vickie Remoe Show, a lot of times who's getting the jobs, because a big thing of the market in Sierra Leone is development communication. So, the UN and all these NGOs that are in the market who need communication stories produced, right? Instead of finding local companies to hire, they will bring in people from the UK consistently, as though we don't have the skill sets and the talent locally, or pitching for contracts and people wanting you to give them money on the side for you to be able to get a deal. And I don't operate that way. So just the challenges have been challenges of industry, of the market itself, right? That this is a developing economy and it's fraught with all kinds of issues. But again, my big thing has always been, I believe in what I am doing. Like, I truly believe in this. I am convinced, I'm sold on it. So that at the end of the day, because I'm convinced and I'm consistently, it's like people go and come and they're like, ah, you're still here. I'm like, mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And so over the years, I've just stuck it out for so long that people have no choice at this point to it's like, I tell them, I'm like, it's okay, go, you'll be back. I will be here. You will come and look for me. And what's really great now is that when Sierra Leonean businesses and individuals when they're ready to do something that's excellent, when they really want the world to know that they're doing something that matters, they come and find me, right? So those are the kinds of people that I work for now. And I actually love it because then when they come to me, it's like, it's such a perfect match, right? Like, I'm launching this thing, it's at this level. And that's why I'm specifically coming to you, because I know you're going to do it your way, right? Like, people are coming specifically for the way that I operate, the way that I tell stories. And so I no longer have to really advertise or, I don't advertise. I don't go out looking for business. People come to me. I just constantly put my work out there and people come to me and, I say, hey, I'm doing this. They'll come to me and that's how it works. So entrepreneurship is not an overnight kind of thing. You don't start out and you make it big. It's little steps and little iterations. And a big part of it is you yourself as the entrepreneur understanding your business model, understanding the market, and knowing how to pivot and how to kind of respond to the realities of your market. Because, for example, I can't operate my business like I'm in South Africa, right? There are just things that are not possible. I can't do business like I'm in the US. There are just things that are not possible in my market. So it's about constantly thinking about, what does this market need and what is it willing to pay for, right? Because I can say something is great, but if the market isn't willing to pay for it, then it's not going to be viable.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Vickie, especially for the point of agencies bringing their journalists from different countries to cover African content, which brings us to Dimitri Martinez's question. So it says, thank you for a great discussion. I want to ask, how come we don't hear enough stories from other African countries, from journalists in those countries, rather than from the global news agencies? Are there options from smaller media companies to reach larger audiences? Example would be through public broadcasters. So African news for African journalists.
It's that's such a sticky one, right? Because for so many reasons, I feel like Pan-African journalism we're just not there yet. It's almost like you're only as strong as your weakest link, for lack of a better word. And if the markets, the national markets, right, are not, let's say, how are we, like in Sierra Leone as a smaller market, or in Liberia, or in the ECOWAS sub-region, you have so much diversity in industry and also earning power differences that it's very difficult for you to export the content of media that you're doing to reach other markets. So for example, I'm from Sierra Leone. I've taken my show to Liberia to produce content. And, then it's been broadcast in Sierra Leone and then it's gone on online. So online, yes, Liberians were able to access that content and, give it those, the reach, but Liberians want to see Liberian content, right? And Sierra Leoneans want to see Sierra Leonean content. One person that I feel like has shown maybe a possible different model is Wodamaya, who has this YouTube channel where he travels to all these different countries and, spotlighting good news from all of those different countries. And so on YouTube, yeah, that's a platform that you can use, but it's also very costly to be traveling to these countries all the time. And what you'll find is like each story, if it's about Nigeria, then it'll get a lot of Nigerian viewers, right? And then when you go to another time, if it's about Namibia, and I just don't feel like in the long run, that's very sustainable, unless there's some like big conglomerate that's like, oh, we're doing Pan-African news and willing to throw like $1 billion at it or something. It's like literally like $1 billion problem. For the most part, I feel like, I don't know if DSTV does this anymore. They used to do like Africa 54 or something like that. This was this show that they would go to different countries and produce stories, like kind of lifestyle entertainment shows. But even that wasn't, like it's not sustainable, because advertisers in South Africa are going to ask you, why are you showing these stories? Like, I want to see South African content. That's what I'm paying for. And so, yeah, I think, fortunately, the big, what ends up happening for Pan-African stories is that it's a kind of story that only CNN can afford to tell, right? These are the kinds of stories that big international companies with the finances to fund them can tell. But as a local journalist, or like as national journalists, or, storytellers from our countries, we don't have the capacity to consistently, one-off maybe here and there, but to consistently produce stories about Africa from the national level is just very challenging.
Yes, Shahan?
Yeah, the reality is that there are some people who want to know stories from another African country. But if you look at audience ratings, which is what most broadcasters go by when they tell stories, there's not a lot of interest. And it's so evident if journalists and people in this industry look at what happened at SABC. They had SABC Africa. They had bureaus all across Africa. And what happened? People weren't watching. So when people don't watch, you don't have advertisers, and then you have to shut down bureaus. And then people want to blame the broadcasters for not focusing on Africa. But the reality is they tried. They had bureaus, they set up bureaus, they set up a whole channel on DSTV for people to watch, but there simply wasn't enough viewers on that channel. And then they didn't get money to actually fund the bureaus. And that's where we sit. Broadcasters in South Africa, ENCA also tried it. They had ENCA Africa. They had a whole division that was set up to cover African news. Nobody watched it. And when people don't watch, and I'm not saying nobody, the numbers were too small. When people don't watch, there's no advertising, you're not making money, and you can't run as an organization that way. You can't blow money just because there are 200,000, not even 200, because in DSTV, the numbers are not that high even, because there are 20,000 people watching you. It's not enough. So there might be criticism for broadcasters for not getting local voices or telling stories in Africa from the country. But, facts versus fiction here, that's what we're talking about. And that's why broadcasters are unable to do it. Us as a startup, we're nowhere close to being able to do something like that. I can't pay dollars in Kenya for a team to produce a story for me because I earn rands. And we all know it's 18 rand for $1. So I'm not going to be paying 10,000 rand for one story from Kenya.
Don't let me tell you how many Sierra Leonean leones it is for $1, because you might weep. I'm not even going to bring that up. Okay. 18 rand. Woo, I wish. Yeah.
We're almost at the end of our webinar, but before we do, please can you take us through your staff structure?
Okay, so like I said, what I've had to do for the Vickie Remoe Show. So I started out only as a media company to produce the Vickie Remoe Show, right? But when I took a break from the show in 2010, I went to Columbia journalism school. Then I moved to Ghana, and I realized, and of course, naturally, I'm like, my Vickie Remoe Show from Sierra Leone is not going to work in Ghana. So I need to, what can I do now? So that's when I formed my marketing communications company and got into marketing for brands. And then when I brought the Vickie Remoe Show back several years later, it was now as a kind of like as a company project, right? Like the company owns the Vickie Remoe Show and produces the Vickie Remoe Show. So, but my company structure is one that because I have to produce video for clients, because I have to do photography for clients, because I have to do content marketing for clients and copywriting and graphic design, the people that I have on staff for my marketing company are the same people that end up going on the road with me when we make the Vickie Remoe Show or work on marketing for the Vickie Remoe Show. So year round, these are like my core staff in my company. And then when we go into production, they're the same. We basically have to stop doing client work and then go on the road to make the show. So what ends up happening is that, yeah, it's just like we pivot to, okay, now we're in production, and everybody puts on their production roles. So the office manager takes on his, road show producer, hat. Our photographer becomes the BTS person, right? Our production assistant, the comms officer becomes a production assistant. So everybody then takes on a different role when we're producing the Vickie Remoe Show. And then when we're done, people come, because the skill sets ultimately are the same. What you need to tell stories about brands and development organizations, it's really the same skill sets you need to tell stories about your community, right? I feel like one thing that's so powerful about being in the media is that I think of communication skills as life skills. I think of media skills as life skills that if you're a multimedia person, you're in journalism and media, technically, in my world, I always say there's no way you should ever be unemployed, right? Because you can take those skill sets across any industry and they are marketable. So my staff structure is, I have a flat staff structure. So it's me, and then everybody else kind of is here, right? We have an open door policy. I don't really believe in hierarchies of like, this person reports to this person, reports to this person. No, a different project will require like a different team. So we build different teams and then people have different roles. And that's how we work. But for the most part, everybody on my team is somebody that I taught. I train them myself, because while in South Africa, you have such a development market, in Sierra Leone, the skill sets, we don't have a school of journalism in Sierra Leone. Right. So I can't go and say, hey, let me just get some new grads. It's just not there. So, my video producer, I trained myself. Everybody's like been with my company for several years. And, they came to me, and what I was looking to your point, Shahan, about feeling people's energy. What I always say is that, like, I really don't care what kind of degree you have. It doesn't matter to me nothing matters to me but your attitude and willingness to learn. Can I work with this person on a day-to-day basis? Is this, when we have a challenge, when we have an issue, when it is 11 o'clock, is this the kind of person who's going to be right there with me? Or is going to, like, at 4:59, like, oh, I gotta go, So that's kind of what it's been, building a team.
Yeah. So we started in not even June, July, August last year. So our team is very lean and mean. And there's no me and Tanya. No, we're all here. Tanya and I report and run the business. And there are 5 of us who are on staff. And those are the core people that run this business: video editor, a social media producer, a production assistant, Tanya and myself. And the way we did it was to make sure that we are able to tell the stories in Cape Town, but then we hire freelance journalists in Joburg and Durban to tell the stories. And that's how we've managed to make it work. And Vickie spoke about a one-man band. That's what we look for. We look for a reporter who can shoot and tell a story. I don't want to have to hire a camera person and a journalist, because then that's more money, and I don't have money to waste. So when it comes to staffing, that's how we keep it as lean as possible, but still deliver high quality work, because every story that goes out goes through the entire team. We all sit down together, we all brainstorm, we all talk about different ways of telling the story, and we do it. I'm a reporter, I am a video editor sometimes, I sub-edit and approve all of the tweets, anything that goes out, we're all doing it, same thing. Yep. Because we have to be multi-skilled and talented to make sure that this business works and runs efficiently. That for me is key.
Absolutely. I say this all the time. Like, if you can only do one kind of like journalism for me, I'm sorry, I can't help you, because it's yes, you have to be able to write copy. You have to be able to do social media. You have to be able to like produce. I don't necessarily expect everybody to know how to edit like long form, but you need to be able to like cut a couple clips. Like I need to be able to get a reel from you. Like give me something, I need you to write and do photography. And so, because when I went to journalism school, I'll never forget this. Like at Columbia, they send, I was in the broadcast track, and they send you out report on stories by yourself, tripod, camera, sound, and they send you to a housing project and they say, go bring back stories, get there at 7 a.m. And by 1 a.m. I had to be back on campus and my story had to be ready to go by 3:30. And
Wow.
so, there were some days like it would end in tears. Like you would end in tears because, I'm out there on my beat trying to talk to somebody about like, crime and drugs. Like really, this was like hard news. Like I had a community beat and nobody like, this is like the hood. Ain't nobody trying to talk to you. And then I'll call my professor. I'm like, oh, June, nobody's trying to talk to me. I should just come back to campus. And she'd be like, don't you come back here without a story. Oh my God. So it's like in the fall, it's like 40 degrees. I put my tripod, put the camera, turn the viewfinder to myself, stand there with the microphone and trying to position my head properly so that I have headspace to report like, hi, this is Vickie Remoe for Columbia Journalism News. Today, I'm in the community and no one wants to talk to me. I wonder why. So yeah, like, that's my expectation. I'm like, yeah, heard it. You got to have all the skill sets to be marketable right now. And into the future, I don't think that's going to change.
Thank you so much, guys, for highlighting the importance for a journalist to be multi-skilled. It's very important. And also Vickie for highlighting newsrooms do not care if it's raining, if it's snowing. At the end of the day, you need to have a story on air. You need to have a person on air speaking on the particular story. They don't care how you got it, but the story needs to be on air. Thank you for reminding me of that. So please tell us what lies ahead for the Vickie Remoe Show and for FeelSA, Shahan.
Wow. Okay. So like I said, we got so I had this grand vision before the pandemic to travel across all the 16 districts of Sierra Leone to produce these individual kind of like district level stories where we would tell different stories about, music and tradition and culture and art and business, but, like a small portrait of each of these districts. And we only did 7 of 16. And so my goal for this year is to get back on the road. We're going to tweak the format a little bit where instead of focusing on district level, we'll focus on themes. So for example, we'll do, instead of, this and this and this in this one district, we'll go to each district, record it. But what we'll produce is markets in Sierra Leone and look at them across each district and have that be a one thing. Because what we found, again, is that once we put the line, even within the country, viewership for stories that were just regional, people weren't necessarily interested on the regional focus. I think they're more interested in the cross-cultural lens. So like, one topic, how is it across the board? So that Sierra has elections in June. A lot, they will be free, fair, credible, and violence-free. If they are, then I will be able to return home sometime in November to go back series. We also now have a podcast of the Vickie Remoe Show, which is called which initially was like a direct offshoot from the show because we couldn't travel, but now it's for us in the summertime. So sometime in June is going into production for the next season of immediately next for me. And now recently I started a new Facebook called the Vickie Talks, where I'm talking mostly about current events and news as we're going into the election, and people really need local voices, people who understand the context and the history, et cetera, breaking down what's happening as we get closer into the elections, because the disinformation and the propaganda is and so being able to highlight, hey, this is what people are talking about on the timeline today or this week, but here are the facts, here's what you should be paying attention to. And also just reminding people that, elections are not the end all be all. And, our peace, even though it's been 2 decades since the end of the war, is still quite fragile. And for young people, especially, to remember to not allow politicians to use them as tools for destruction as we get closer to the June elections. So that's what's up. That's what I'm working on now.
Thank you, Vickie. Shahan?
Mine's very simple. Go international, baby. That's what I'm trying to do. I want to take the good South African stories abroad. And I want people to see that there's more to our country than crime and violence. So I'm going to start approaching international broadcasters to buy our content. The one question was, why can't South Africans or Africans tell their own stories? Why do we have to get an American journalist from CNN coming in? So our alternative is to say to CNN, hey, we're producing the positive stories in this country. We are local. Can you buy our content and broadcast it? And that's basically what I'm looking at doing. We want to expand that way because we are a wire service. And we want to change the perception about our country and, make people more aware about the good things that happen here. So that's our move. Short, sweet, simple, and where that happens or not, we have to wait and see if those people are interested in it. But we're going to keep pushing because the stories are that great. I mean, if I had to show any of our stories to an international audience, I'm sure they're going to love it and consider actually putting it on their platforms.
Thank you for that, Shahan. We actually have a comment from one of our attendees, and he's asking if you're willing to expand on your comment on Kenya. Says he would be willing to contribute stories, even on a volunteer basis, and has a background in journalism.
Oh, great. Yeah, why not? I mean, I have an online platform and I can put anything I want on that platform. I don't have to go to a boss because I am the boss. You know what I'm saying? So if the content is, which is what I was talking about, if it's of good quality and it meets our standards, it can go on our website. Yeah. And that's the platform. We want to give people that platform to go onto a website and see good content. And he can easily get my details through you, Lindokuhle. Just pass my email address on and then we can get chatting.
Okay, we'll do that. Thank you so much, Vickie and Shahan. I really appreciate this. The webinar was very informative and I'm sure we all learned a thing or two. So this brings us to the end of our webinar. I hope you guys had a great time. So Jamlab hosts regular webinars such as this one throughout the year. Please check out our social media platforms and website on some of the work that we also do. I'd like to acknowledge the support of our funders and partners, the Swedish International Development Agency, SIDA, through the CHARM project for their generous support.